What's going on YouTube? Welcome to the continuation of this Bouguereau Master Study. So I have a printout that I'm using for this painting, and we started it on a live stream a week ago. I have a link in the description box to that live stream, so if you want to see how we got from from nothing to here with this reference, check out the link in the description. So I am going to do some quick little assessments here since I have the printout, and you'll see a photo reference over there. I'm going to edit it in there, but I want to make sure to check this measurement right here. Make sure that this is approximately the same, which it is. And we're going to check this little measurement from the bottom of the nose down to the chin. Make sure that it is relatively close, if not exact, and we're pretty much exact. And we can check the mouth, I guess, as well. I can check anything we want to. So following the center line right over here, I'm looking at where this goes right there. Pretty much dead on. And like I said, we could check everything. We could check the distance between the eyes, which is relatively small. This is a Bouguereau, so it is kind of idealized. And so there we have that. And of course, the contour of the face is going to need a little bit of work because I didn't have it quite as exacting as the reference, but that's okay. We're going to continue to build this one now. So the colors that I have here are titanium white, Naples yellow hue. This is burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, raw umber, ivory black. I have mostly alkyds, though I did use a regular oil paint for these two. These are just Plaza oil colors, but don't concern yourself with any of that. Just use any paints that you want to. You can even do a similar process with acrylics if you want. For my solvent over here, I have, I guess you might not be able to see it on the camera, but it's just clipped onto this. It is a citrus solvent, but you can use just regular odorless mineral spirits for that. Alrighty, so we're going to pick up where we left off before, and I'm going to correct whatever needs to be corrected proportionally before moving on to any extra information. So this is going to be the simplest correction here. I just have a little bit too much right there, so I'll just use the raw umber and I'll thin it out with just a little drop of the citrus solvent, which is similar to like a spike lavender. Just use it if you don't want to use any petroleum distillates in your studio space. So just as you see there, I'm just going with an outline, and that should give me the correction for the contour that I needed. And this will evaporate into the air, and it won't look as dark later on. But that is our contour. As this is a pre-recorded video, I will obviously not be talking quite as much, but I will be taking some breaks. I noticed when I did the live stream, I did this for... Alright, let me stop the talking here, make sure I check my proportions. Again, my printout is over there, so yeah, these are exact. So just kind of talking and painting without taking a break every 20-30 minutes is not a good idea, and it presents a lot of fatigue, and it can make you feel a little bit burnt out over time. So to prevent that from happening too much with me, I'm going to do kind of a mix of pre-recorded and live format. There we got the distance between the eyes. Now I have the angle for the eyes. I like raw umber because it's an excellent drawing color. And this is a Bouguereau. Once again, link in the description box to the Bouguereau. I printed it out and I'm painting it the same exact scale so that I can do a master copy. So I'm pretending as if the printout is in fact an actual painting. Usually I work from the computer screen, but over time working with a computer screen is not so good for my eyes. So now I'm using some printouts, and I'm using a pretty decent printer. So if you don't have a good printer, it might be worthwhile to get a printer. They're not as expensive as they used to be back in the day. They were pretty darn expensive back in the early 2000s. Now, not so bad. Okay, so we've got the model looking up. And this is the same degree of specificity that I would have if this was a pencil drawing. So you always want to factor everything based on what would you be doing if it was a drawing. Okay, the eyebrows are pretty accurately placed relative to the eyes. So I just want to get these little shapes in there before getting into form modeling. And this form shadow is actually right over here. So as you saw, I did this little motion on the palette, so I just got rid of some excess paint that I didn't need. These are relatively inexpensive brushes. I mean, really cheap brushes, actually. Yeah, you can get a whole pack of these short handle brushes for like pretty cheap. Get like, I don't know, like 20 or 30 of them for like $20 or $30 or less. In some cases, a lot less. Now, I don't want to lose this position right here. Though it's a little bit cloudy where it sits, I want to make sure that this is set in stone. So just a little mark there so I don't forget. Same thing here with the middle of the mouth. Though I won't put one down for the chin because that's going to be hard to paint over. Now I can take two different routes. I can go and flatten the light and shadow out a little bit further, or I can go into modeling. I want this to be as simple as possible. So I'm going to flatten out the light and shadow even more before going into modeling. So perhaps I won't even get into modeling as soon as I thought. So let's go ahead and flatten out the light and dark. Now I'm going to have a light brush and a dark brush. And what I'm going to do is avoid having to clean my brushes as much. And let me show you what happens with the cheaper brushes. You get something like this. They kind of start to get worn down, but you just add a bunch of paint to it and kind of spin the brush and it creates a usable tip to the brush. These cheap ones are pretty much almost always round brushes. So I'm creating something for the sclera, the white of the eye. So what we want to do is make the light and shadow as obvious as possible. Like I said, I've done many different approaches with these paintings over the years. I personally would probably just get right into modeling, but just to make it as clear as possible, I'm going to hold back on some of the modeling and push the light and shadow. Make that as obvious as possible. And you can use titanium white, you could use lead white, doesn't really matter. And maintaining really strong light and shadow takes discipline. It's very tempting to just get right into the colors. And last year I did a lot of live streams where I did exactly that. And you may see me do that with some other paintings later on. Because, those are not as academic. So you need to be able to, switch mindset from purely academic to, more expressive. You need to have both to be a well-rounded painter. Now when you work this way, ideally you want to work lighter, and then as the layers go on, it gets slightly darker. But we're going to use something that we're going to refer to as dead coloring. So I'm going to have very minimal chroma. I don't have a single cadmium on here, so this is going to be very minimal chroma. And the goal here is to create almost like a dulled out skin color, like a marble looking skin color. Not quite like a jaundiced or anemic looking skin color, but a little closer to the pale side. Why would we do that? I'll tell you why. So classically, you want to build your layers and build your color as you go, because the emphasis is always going to be on the drawing. Classical painting always emphasizes drawing. And so having a planned approach where you prioritize drawing and you minimize color variation first is going to produce more of a simple transition into color. Now, obviously for most painters, including myself, we'll just jump right into color and figure it out as we go. But this is a great exercise. Now that we have these dark lights, now we're going to move down here towards the nose. But again, this is a great exercise in restraint. If you are a painter that has many years experience, you've probably done many Bouguereau studies. There's always something to learn. So I will be painting about no more than 30 minutes at a time before taking a break. Much needed break. And that's the highest chroma that I'll have here, so very low on the chroma side. Once again, you can do this with acrylics as well. Just make sure to mix using a stay wet palette so that your colors don't dry on you, and then you have to remix them. Remember, don't lose your proportional anchor points. So I'm going to be really cautious, and this is where the alizarin crimson will go into effect. Alizarin crimson is a really useful color for portraiture because it allows you to create a dark, warm tone that you can't get with just a cadmium or a burnt sienna. Now, don't concern yourself with the likeness or the characteristic just yet. You're building your way up towards the specifics, but there are some things that are set in stone, and that's these proportional markers here. Again, that's my all-important point right there that I don't want to lose. So I will do my best to get the exact value that I need. Color-wise, in the shadows, in the dead layer, is what we're calling this. In the dead layer, you can actually get the exact shadow if you want. Why? Because shadows typically don't have a lot of chroma unless you are painting out in the sunlight or you're painting in light conditions that, like a neon, like a fluorescent light. That's going to change things. But under northern light or just daylight in general, which is more of the classical lighting, obviously, because we didn't have light bulbs in the 17th, 18th century. Actually, we might have had them. Some conspiracy theories in the Egyptian light bulb or something. Anyway, we didn't. Light bulbs weren't commonly used in antiquity, right? So daylight is what we are going for, and Bouguereau, of course, with the lighting, must have used the daylight. So mixed up a dark light, and that's going to give me the characteristic for the wing of the nose. So right now we're just emphasizing light and shadow, because this is completely flat. It will remain flat, but we are paying a lot of attention to the dark lights. This would be another one of them. Dark light. Now, portrait presents a lot of challenges in terms of drawing. But there's one thing about portraiture that stands out the most, and that is it's very repeatable. You figure something out in one portrait, you can transfer it over to another. Just be mindful not to replicate the same likeness over and over. And here black can act as a coolant. That's how limited palettes work, because black is actually a color. It leans towards the blue. These dark lights are very important in describing form. It'd be pretty tough to describe form without them. Raw umber leans towards the blue as well in comparison to the burnt version of it, burnt umber. These are really nice and rich colors. And I think I'll take a break right about now. Yeah, I can't emphasize how important that is to be able to take a break, have a cup of tea, or brew a cup of tea, and just give yourself time to relax. You want to be able to paint consistently, but you want to also be able to listen to your body as well. When we're younger, we're able to, believe it or not, I think when we're younger, we're actually able to focus with intent a little bit longer than we do when we get older. But when we get older, I'm mixing something like this, but maybe a little lighter. But when we get older, I think all the experience really adds up. And in an effort to make the most out of that experience, I think it's important to listen to your body and take breaks. Now, maybe adding too much color to that dark light. So, plot twist. When I said focus on the light and shadow, you probably thought that I was going to start mixing something for here. But this is already good as it is. It's light and it distinguishes itself from the shadow. When I say focus on the light and shadow, we're mostly focusing on the dark light. What is the dark light? The dark light is the value, just as light terminates into shadow. This is a mahogany sheet of wood that I'm using as a palette. It may comment if it's too dark. I can make another one with a maple, maybe something a little clearer. But I want this value to basically be the same as the shadow. See that? So if you didn't know, the tone of the palette should be helpful with respect to whatever colors you're mixing. So the fact that this kind of resembles the shadows kind of gives me a good indicator of what I'm mixing in the light, especially in the dark lights. And let's just soften this edge. You know, I actually think that this might be closer to a Venetian red. I thought it was more like a burnt sienna. See, now that I actually don't have to focus on the live stream as much. So this is called light red. This is the one I'm using. I'm going to list it as a Venetian red. I'm going to call it a Venetian red. I think this is closer to Venetian red than it is burnt sienna. Because I got it because I thought it was closer to burnt sienna. Alright, here's burnt sienna. Actually, burnt sienna is a little darker. Burnt sienna is a little darker than that. So I guess we can call that a Venetian red. My apologies for the mistake there. Either way, it's a neutral red. You can use either or. Doesn't change much. I just noticed it had a little too much tinting power. Now, if you're doing this in acrylic, you're gonna do the same exact process. There's really no wet on wet mixing that I'm doing here. Everything is pretty much tiling. So the saturation is relatively low. I'm not painting that bright. I'm just going to step back once in a while. Now, if you use a burnt sienna, you're actually going to use more of it than I did with this light red from Plaza. Because I'm beginning to think that the light red is more of a, like I said, it's more of a Venetian red. Okay, we set this proportional marker to be the middle, and we're actually on the upper side of this brush stroke. So let's make a note of that. You always want your lines to have some kind of thickness to them. It's kind of like a lane. If you're a motorcyclist, the lane has a middle, a left, and a right, and you typically want to be in the side away from whatever traffic is next to you. So it's actually right here on the top. Right there. Let's pinpoint that again on the reference. And we are golden. Now here, I like to paint the top middle of the upper lip relative to the philtrum, and I get an exact shape for that. And this is a really, this varies a lot with different models. Of course, Bouguereau goes more for the idealization and makes this petite right there. That's what Bouguereau has on his. Of course, his has more chroma to it. I made it a tad bit lighter, so later on we'll add more chroma. But that's the shape that we want. Almost lost it. That's the shape that we want. Let's go back in with the light. Depending on your level of focus, you may have more, a higher level of focus than I do, or you may have a little less. But for me, a lot of things tend to distract me or get in my way when I'm painting. So it actually kind of helps when I have something to focus on. Like if I have the TV playing, that's usually what I'll do. Music. So it helps to be aware of that. Just think about how you focused when you were in school. How did you study for your exams? The master study or master copy is kind of like that. Cup of tea, high level focus. When we do other things like still life or landscape, that'll be more like a rock concert or a EDM concert or whatever is popular now. Trap rap or whatever you're listening to. What I'm saying is, when we work with big shapes and colors and get everything all like mapped out faster, it's more fast-paced. It can be more stressful to some painters, but it's a good idea to have a balance between the two. We can get a direct measurement from the printout, and we're golden, pretty much. Now I know you can't see it, it's off to the corner. Could be a little bit, yeah, it could be a little wider. Maybe to about there. And here I'll do a little plumb line. Where does this match with the edge of the eye? Pretty much right there. And so it helps to have a printout. These days I would suggest a printout over working from the computer screen. Now the computer screen is good because it doesn't distort, like a printer can distort something, but so can a computer screen, as we are all aware of now. Back in the old days, back in the early 2000s or whatever, 20 teens, when I was studying, and of course we're always learning, we're always studying, but when I was told to work from screens because printouts would alter things, I think it was more or less because my teachers didn't really know how to use the settings on a printer. I'm not throwing any shade on my teachers, but I honestly think that the printer is better now. So I've changed my opinion about that recently. Dark light is going to exist over here. As I'm using mostly Alkyd, minus these two, I'm using mostly Alkyd. This is going to start to dry, which is what I want. And I'll continue to work on this as time goes on. I've come to realize this might be really useful as a sleeping aid. So, if you are watching this as a sleeping aid, or listening to this as a sleeping aid, let me know. That was one of the top comments I used to get, that I would help you sleep. So if this helps you sleep, maybe you'll dream about painting. Have some dreams about painting, before you gotta wake up and go to work or do whatever it is you're gonna do in the morning. I'll put the shadow underneath of the lower lip first. The printout and having a printout and painting the same proportion of the face as the printout gives you that extra, kind of like extra peace of mind knowing that you have the proportions, you have the angle, and you're able to get more precise with it. And with the printout, you can match the color if you want to. Obviously, I usually don't suggest to match colors, but at least you can make that comparison. And if you can, make sure to stand when you're painting. I'm standing as I'm recording this. Here's another useful application of alizarin. Like I said, I don't want to have a lot of chroma, but with the lips, it's pretty simple to do this. As you saw, pretty much just red, white, and whatever skin tone you had gives you the color of the lip. So that's pretty useful. Okay, so now we're going to push this dark, as of course unifying these darks is a good idea at first, but now we really want to differentiate. Having a light brush and a dark brush is a good idea, but it looks like I've been using the same one. Always make sure to have ample mixing space available to you. So we may be running right off camera. Let's just make this lower lip a little less bulky. Okay, now we'll move on to here. So this is an opportunity. One shot, one opportunity. Pinpoint where this shape goes. Pretty much right where we have it, so not much to change there. Like I said, I don't want that much chroma, but as you see with these mixtures, We're adding a reddish touch to this. That works just fine. I don't need to concern myself with the reflected light just yet. And whenever I do finish this painting, obviously it's going to take more than one video, I'm going to play around with the idea of combining them all into one. Just one really long video. Now that I kind of figured out a little bit more about how to use YouTube. Dark light right over here. So these will be shorter videos to help you learn to paint or to relax or to fall asleep. Let's double check this angle. But then I'll create a longer one. If I remember. If I forget, just remind me in the comments. But we will finish this one. And we can actually use this same shadow right over here. And right over here. That's the beauty of the dead layer. Don't have to worry too much about the color. Just get the value right. And shadows make a dramatic difference. Very dramatic. That's why oftentimes you'll see painters go right into shapes of light and shadow because it makes a huge visual difference. And it oftentimes will help you with your drawing. But don't get addicted to just shapes of light and dark with no meaning. They must have substance. Now that I've learned that this leans towards the Venetian red, I know to add other colors like black to dull it out. Now this is way off this shape I had initially for the clothing. Goes to about there. Big difference when we add the light and the dark. All of a sudden, if the things are in the right spot, likeness begins to emerge. As my teacher John DeMartin would say, likeness is no more than the confirmation of an accurate drawing. A drawing is a series of corrections. Just focusing on the dark lights. That is all. Now let's let's do something here. This will be the light brush. I'm going to designate this light brush once again. I'll try not to forget. And this will be the dark brush. Like I said, this will be the dark brush. So let me try not to forget. But we're past, or I'm past the 20-minute. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break soon. Okay, I'll go ahead and take a break now. Alrighty, after a much needed break, now what I'm going to do is flatten the light out again, but a little bit towards the, towards like a pinkish color. So this on its own might be kind of dark. Let's give this one a go. Yeah, as you see, they're pretty dark. Let's go ahead and bring the palette knife back. And I believe we put pretty much straight white there, so maybe it wasn't fair to put that right where we did. Alright, that should be good. Let's give it a go. There we go. Now just going to flatten this out. But of course we are going to leave the dark lights. And this is in preparation for the modeling. So before I get into the modeling, to make things easier, I want the light and shadow and the dark lights to be very evident, very clear, crystal clear. Now the modeling will likely be done in somewhat of a time-lapse form because I will be spending a significant amount of time on it, and in order to kind of be a little more streamlined with the video, that's probably the approach I'll take. Now, it's going to look kind of like we're adding some kind of face mask on here, and it should look like that. That means we've created volume. And it's all about the illusion of form. Now I'm not adding as much paint to the corners to just kind of dry brush a soft edge. You can do this same exact thing with acrylic. In fact, this probably looks more like an acrylic than it does an oil painting at this point. But we want the clarity of light and shadow along with the dark lights. This is already starting to feel like it's drying, which is what we want. Okay, so now the dark lights that are the most obviously sticking out will be addressed before we let this dry. And of course we'll add something for the shadows. So we'll put this off to the side. Very useful mixture. You can reuse when we have to. Now you can go about this in many different ways. you can jump into modeling or clarify in a very organized manner the boundary of the forms that you will model, and that takes a little more discipline, and that's the route we're going to go. So we're not going to model anything, rather we're going to set aside the areas that we will model, and I'll explain what I mean by that right now. So I'm going to add about 3 values in the dark light as it approaches the middle light. So right here, 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3, 3 being the darkest. To simplify this form, 3 will subdivide into about 9 different values. But I want this to be a clear plane break. I don't want to blend any of it. So clear plane break right there. Now I don't want it to be overly sharp, but I don't want it to be too soft as well. So it's a bit of a slippery slope. And this is why I said that little mixture there, quite useful. So we'll just soften this a little bit. Just a little. Color-wise, we can add a warmer tint to the lower eyelids. It's so prominent in the printout. I wonder if it's like that in the original. Probably not, but again, we're going to treat this like it is. And some of the most complicated ideas have this kind of ambiguity to them, where it's kind of a little to this direction, but still kind of in the other direction, that kind of ambiguity. So when I say I want it to be soft, but I don't want it to be overly soft, it really just means enough of a plane break where I can see the distinction, but not as sharp as something like, say, something like that. And that's really not something that I can measure, per se, unless we're using some kind of very mechanical device, and you don't want to be too mechanical either. But just mechanical enough, see what I mean? The most complicated concepts have a little air of ambiguity. So just a little bit of color there. We'll do the same with the ear. In general, the whole shape is a little bit darker and warmer. Again, we'll add all the specificity to it later. We're holding back on the specificity, or the modeling, I should say. we're holding back on the modeling. Right here, we can make this a tad bit warmer and soften this edge. It's a very important dark light. See why it's important to save that little mixture? Now, I don't really do that often, to be honest with you, but if I did that more often, I might be a little more efficient with my studio paintings. Darken just a little. Now I see that this gets wider. So I had that off a little bit. Now let's switch back to the raw umber. I'm gonna have to add a little more. I'll just mix black and our red. Now for a very specific mark, we're going to go for the contour yet again. It's good to have something to lean your hand on. We call it a maul stick. Give me a second. I am going to use a pool stick. It's my maul stick. Now I'm going to take a step back and see. That may be too red, or it may be just right. Might be a little bit too red. Camera may not be picking that up. I'm going to put corner the eyelid here. Make it more specific now. A lot of dark lights are going to fit in here when we get into the modeling. Now that could have been me adding a little bit more of my own likeness by mistake, making that thicker. It's a very complicated shape. So it still has a little bit of the cheekbone out here. And this pretty much lines up perfectly. with the corner of the tear duct right there, edge of the tear duct. This is a good cue to stand back. So we're doing pretty good there. Okay, so what I'll do next is just add a little more dark over here, and I think it'll be good. Let's darken this first. We're going to have all the time in the world to add the specifics to this later. So this is kind of like, if you're more of an alla prima painter, this process is kind of like eating your vegetables, if you don't like vegetables that much. Having a little bit of restraint. So you know you can just jump right into the modeling, but you have a little restraint. And when this dries, it'll likely sink in. So when it sinks in, it won't look as dark. Or it may not sink in. That's what I like about the alkyds. Sometimes they don't really sink in that much. So not straight black, it has some of the brownish tones in it. And I'm also using a scrubbing motion, so I'm not adding the full opacity of the paint. And I may have slipped up a little bit there. It's already starting to behave as if it's touch dry. Well, it's drying, which is fine. That's what we want it to do. All right. So I'd say that is a successful dead layer. So as you see, it is flattened out with the light. The middle lights are flattened out, which once this dries, which will be pretty soon, based on, let's just add one more brush stroke, which will be pretty soon based on the fact that it's already drying on the palette. We will be able to go in with more transparent layers and start to model the form. So what that means is spending a little bit of time per shape, not much, maybe 20 minutes or so per square inch, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not that bad. Just set aside enough time for yourself to be able to take breaks, which differentiates it from more of a, like a fast-paced alla prima type painting, which you can do pretty much all of it in the span of a couple hours. This is much more attention to specificity. So once again, thank you so much for watching. Wish you the very best, and I'll see you next time.